She believed a few carefully chosen words would be enough to have a black man removed from first class, until he calmly reached into his jacket and revealed his FBI badge. At Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Patricia Langford moved gracefully through the terminal, her luxury carry-on rolling effortlessly beside her. She was a frequent flyer on this route, Dallas to Washington, D.C., and always flew first class. Everything about the experience felt familiar. Early boarding, sparkling wine and crystal flutes, and the quiet ambience shared by executives and elite travelers. So when she reached her seat and found a black man in a tailored navy suit already settled beside her, her pace slowed. He looked composed, focused on his laptop as he reviewed what seemed like important files. Patricia frowned slightly, placing her expensive tote down with more force than necessary before taking her seat, her discontent barely concealed. First class, in her mind, wasn't supposed to include surprises. The man, Daniel Stokes, remained engrossed in his work, his fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The soft glow from the screen reflected off his face, revealing sharp, composed features. His calm presence suggested he belonged there. Patricia wasn't so sure. She adjusted her posture, exhaling through her nose, and her handbag bumped against his armrest without a response from him. Still unsettled, she sat upright, subtly scanning the cabin for a flight attendant. Then, leaning slightly in his direction, she spoke in a courteous yet pointed tone, asking if he was certain he was in the correct seat. Without looking up, Daniel answered with a simple yes. No further comment. No justification. She cleared her throat, once again surveying the aisle. This time, she caught the attention of Emily Jacobs, a flight attendant nearby, assisting other passengers. With a small motion of her hand, Patricia signaled her over. Daniel let out a quiet sigh, small but telling. Emily, all professionalism and poise, approached with a polite smile and asked if everything was all right. Patricia responded with a restrained laugh and claimed there may have been a seating mix-up, suggesting the man next to her wasn't in the right spot. Emily glanced at Daniel, who finally paused and looked up. His face was calm, his expression neutral, but there was something resolute in his gaze. Not confusion, not surprise, just quiet certainty. Emily retrieved the passenger list from her tablet, her eyes scanning the screen quickly. Actually, Mr. Stokes is exactly where he's supposed to be, she said with polite assurance. Your seat is 2A, and he's seated in 2B. Patricia's grip tightened on her armrest. That's strange, she replied with a strained chuckle. Are you absolutely sure? Emily, already understanding the direction of the conversation, kept her composure. Yes, everything's in order, she responded with a calm smile. Patricia's facial expression twitched slightly. For a brief second, the mask slipped before she recomposed herself with a forced, narrow smile. I suppose these things happen, she muttered, turning back to the window. But she wasn't done. Not even close. Daniel, unfazed, had returned to his work, fingers moving fluidly across the keys. Emily lingered for a moment, sensing the undercurrent of discomfort, then nodded gently at Daniel before stepping away. Patricia, however, was fuming. Her fingers tapped against her knee in agitation, her breathing shallow, her eyes flickering between the flight crew and the man seated beside her. What bothered her more than anything was his silence. No reaction, no attempt to justify his presence, no effort to diffuse the tension. He didn't play along with the narrative she had already written in her mind, and that only deepened her frustration. She wasn't used to letting things go. She wasn't the type to remain quiet. And now, she felt compelled to do something about it. Sitting rigidly in her seat, arms folded tightly, Patricia's thoughts raced. This situation felt unfamiliar, unacceptable. She had spent years flying in this cabin and had never experienced anything quite like this. The man next to her had done nothing wrong, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. Her irritation simmered just beneath the surface, her breathing uneven. She pressed the call button. The soft ding sounded overhead, and Emily returned, her demeanor unchanged, professional and welcoming. "Can I assist you with something?" she asked, Patricia lowered her voice, keeping her tone steady. "I like to change seats." Emily paused, a hint of surprise flashing across her face. "Is something wrong with your seat?" Patricia hesitated briefly. She couldn't say what she was really thinking. Instead, she leaned slightly toward Emily and whispered, "I just don't feel comfortable here." Her words came out slowly and with deliberate weight. Emily's expression shifted ever so slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that," she replied. "If there's a problem with the seat's condition, we can definitely take a look." "It's not the seat," Patricia interrupted firmly. I'd simply prefer to be moved." Emily glanced at Daniel, who had once again paused his typing. He still hadn't spoken, but his fingers hovered above the keys, and his jaw was tight. He was listening, waiting. Emily, maintaining her calm, began checking the seating chart on her tablet. "Let me see if there are any available spots," she said gently. Patricia leaned back in her seat, her lips pressed tightly together, while Daniel remained composed, silent, and unaffected. He didn't respond to her discomfort, didn't acknowledge her passive aggression, and didn't offer any explanation for his presence. That lack of reaction only deepened her frustration. A few rows ahead, a man in a blazer subtly turned to listen while pretending to look at his phone. Across the aisle, a woman nudged her partner. The cabin's attention was beginning to shift toward them. Emily scanned the manifest quickly and looked up with a professional smile. "I'm sorry, but first class is completely full today," she said politely. Patricia's stomach tightened. Emily offered another option. "I could check for seats in economy, if you'd like." Patricia flushed at the suggestion. The idea of being relocated to coach was insulting. She hesitated. "That won't be necessary," she muttered, trying to keep her composure. Emily gave a small nod. "In that case, please remain in your assigned seat, and let us know if you need anything else." Then she turned and walked away. Patricia barely noticed. Her mind was spinning, her ears ringing with humiliation. Daniel, ever silent, resumed his work as if nothing had happened. That was it. That was his response. To ignore her entirely? The calm in his demeanor made her feel invisible, and that was unbearable. Her hands tightened into fists. She couldn't let it end like this. With a sharp breath, she pressed the call button again. This time, Emily took longer to return. When she did, her tone was cautious. "Yes, Mom?" Patricia straightened, clearly escalating. "I want to speak with someone in authority." Emily kept her voice even. "I'm the senior crew member on this flight. Is there something I can clarify?" Patricia's tone turned sharper. "I'd like to speak with the head attendant or the captain." A faint stir rippled through the cabin. Someone laughed quietly nearby. Though Emily's posture remained poised, her expression showed she was growing tired of the charade. "I'm afraid the pilot is preparing for departure and is not available. I'm here to assist with anything you need." Patricia's lips tightened. Her jaw clenched. Daniel showed no reaction, no discomfort, no nervousness. It was like he had experienced situations like this before. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice again. "I don't feel safe." That changed everything. Emily's smile disappeared. Her body stiffened. Daniel stopped typing. On the other side of the aisle, a man with a Bluetooth earpiece muttered under his breath. "Here we go again." Emily straightened fully. "Could you clarify what you mean by that?" Patricia placed her hands delicately in her lap, her head tilted with feigned innocence. "I'm just saying I don't feel comfortable. I think someone else should take this seat." She wasn't being direct, but the implication was clear. Daniel closed his laptop and finally turned to look directly at her. His stare was calm and steady, but something in his eyes made her shift slightly. For the first time, her confidence faltered, but she wasn't finished. Not yet. Her voice rose slightly, not a shout, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I don't feel safe." The phrase echoed with intent. The power behind it wasn't in the volume, but in the weight it carried. A silence fell across the cabin. Emily stood motionless. Daniel placed his hands on his laptop and waited. He wasn't flustered, just present, watching. Patricia remained composed, not gloating but certain she was in control. Emily's tone turned cautious. "Are you saying you feel threatened?" Patricia gave a slight shrug. "Not exactly. I just don't feel at ease. That's all." Across the aisle, a man scoffed audibly. A young woman in the back tilted her phone upward, pretending to message someone, but her camera was clearly aimed at Patricia. Passengers whispered among themselves. Patricia noticed. She felt the shift. She could sense the attention turning against her, but she wouldn't yield. "This is a simple request," she said, still feigning civility. "I'm just asking to be accommodated. If I'm uncomfortable, I should be allowed to move. Isn't that fair?" Emily's jaw clenched slightly. "As I mentioned earlier, there are no available seats in first class." Patricia's tone hardened. "What about coach?" Emily took a breath. "There are 2 open seats in economy." Patricia straightened, her expression firm. "Perfect. He could take one." A quiet wave of murmurs spread through the passengers. Daniel took a slow breath, tapping his fingers once on the laptop before letting them rest. He still didn't argue. Daniel wasn't speaking, but he also wasn't moving. Emily paused, replaying Patricia's request in her mind, needing to be sure she heard it correctly. Her voice dropped slightly, taking on a firmer tone. "Just to confirm, you're asking me to relocate this passenger to economy because you don't wish to sit beside him?" Patricia straightened her seat and gave a curt nod. "Yes." Emily took a slow breath. "That's not going to happen." Patricia's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" Emily's hands folded in front of her as she stood her ground. "Mr. Stokes has a valid first-class ticket, just like you. He's seated exactly where he should be, and I will not ask him to move." Patricia's face turned red. Control was slipping from her hands. Around the cabin, passengers were now openly watching. Some whispered to each other, others exchanged looks. The young woman still held her phone, pointed in Patricia's direction. Patricia's chest tightened. "This is absurd," she muttered. "I'm simply asking for the same consideration that anyone else would receive if they felt uneasy." Emily remained firm. "What you're requesting is the removal of a ticketed passenger from his first-class seat to accommodate your discomfort with no legitimate reason. That isn't a courtesy. That's discrimination." The word struck like a bell. Silence followed. Someone let out a sharp breath through their teeth. Daniel hadn't spoken. His presence remained still, his eyes on Patricia. Waiting. Patricia's heartbeat pounded in her ears. This wasn't how she envisioned things playing out. Emily straightened further. "Mom, we're preparing a taxi. If you can't remain in your seat and follow crew instructions, I'll have to ask you to exit the aircraft." Patricia's stomach sank. "What?" Emily's voice didn't waver. "You have 2 choices. Remain seated and follow procedure, or deplane. Mr. Stokes is staying where he is." A few passengers clapped softly. Patricia's face flushed with humiliation. This situation had flipped completely. She wasn't used to being the one corrected. Her mouth opened to argue, to try to regain control. But before she could speak, Daniel calmly reached into his pocket. He pulled out a leather badge holder, opened it, and held it up. The gold FBI badge shimmered under the cabin lights. The energy inside the plane shifted instantly. Patricia froze. Passengers gasped. Some chuckled under their breath. The young woman, holding her phone, quickly adjusted the focus, zooming in on the badge. Daniel's voice, composed and deliberate, broke the silence. "Would you like to submit a formal complaint? I could take your statement right now." Patricia's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't answer. Daniel remained perfectly still, eyes locked on her, badge in full view. And for the first time, she felt truly cornered. But this wasn't just a moment of embarrassment. Real consequences were beginning to take shape. The stillness in the cabin was dense. The badge's gleam under the lights was impossible to ignore. The realization was clear to everyone. The man she had tried to displace, the one she insinuated was a threat, was a federal agent. Her throat tightened. Daniel hadn't changed expression. He wasn't smug or angry. He simply sat there calm, focused, waiting. His voice cut through again. "Would you like to proceed with the complaint?" The question carried weight. Patricia felt heat rise through her chest and neck. She tried to respond, but her voice barely came out. I. Daniel leaned his head slightly to the side. "You expressed discomfort. That's a serious claim, especially on a federal flight. If you believe I acted improperly, I'm happy to document your statement." Patricia's entire composure wavered. Her body tensed, and the full gravity of the situation crashed down on her. She could feel everything changing. Just moments earlier, she had been in control, steering the situation with confidence, expecting understanding, expecting someone to validate her discomfort. But now the energy had shifted entirely. Instead of support, all eyes were on her, watching, analyzing. A man seated a couple rows ahead let out a quiet laugh, muttering to himself in disbelief. The young woman, still filming, zoomed in on her face. Nearby, Emily stood with her arms crossed, her expression composed, but her eyes revealing something else. A calm expectation, a quiet firmness. She was waiting. So was everyone else. Patricia's breathing turned shallow, her chest rising quickly. She couldn't admit she had fabricated everything. She couldn't say out loud that she had tried to remove him simply because he didn't fit her image of a first-class passenger. But if she pushed her claim any further, she'd be making a formal accusation against a federal agent on a commercial flight, something that carried serious consequences. Her hands shook slightly in her lap. Daniel, still calm, still silent, hadn't looked away. After an agonizing pause, Patricia barely shook her head. No, she whispered. No complaint. Daniel gave a small nod, as if he had already known. He closed his badge holder, returned it to his jacket, and opened his laptop once more, resuming his work as if nothing had happened. For him, the moment was finished. But for Patricia, it was just beginning. A few passengers murmured their approval. Some even clapped softly. Across the aisle, a businessman gave a knowing smirk and returned to reading his paper. The woman who had been recording? She was now typing quickly, her fingers moving with purpose. Patricia's heart pounded. She wanted to disappear in her seat, to rewind the last 10 minutes and erase the entire encounter. But it was too late. There was no going back. She had revealed herself, and everyone had seen it. Worse yet, some had captured it. Her gaze darted around the cabin, hoping for some kind of support, a kind expression, any sign of empathy. But there was none. Even Emily, who had been professional and composed throughout, had lost the gentleness in her face. Patricia swallowed hard. She felt the urge to speak, to reclaim her dignity somehow. But deep down, she knew there was nothing left to say. The plane hadn't even left the ground, and she had already lost. Yet this wasn't just about being embarrassed. It was the beginning of real consequences. She sat stiffly, looking straight ahead, cheeks burning, her breathing quick and uneven. Daniel had already moved on, his attention back on his screen, typing steadily, as though she didn't exist. But the rest of the passengers hadn't moved on. The businessman across the aisle still smirked. The young woman filming had stopped typing, but continued to keep her phone angled slightly toward Patricia, ready. Even the crew members no longer held the same detached professionalism. Emily remained nearby, watching closely. Patricia felt it all, the weight of the stares, the silent judgment that hung in the air. She had misjudged the moment entirely. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, her pulse racing. This wasn't just a misstep she could smooth over with a half-hearted laugh. She had tried to get an FBI agent removed from his seat, on a plane, while being recorded. The full gravity of the situation was settling into her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Her throat was dry. Finally, Emily stepped forward, her tone still courteous but noticeably firmer. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I need to know if you're able to continue this flight without causing any more issues." Patricia stiffened again. Around her, passengers pretended not to listen, but their attention was fully on her. She wanted to lash out, to ask why she was the one being questioned when all she had done was express discomfort. But that badge had changed everything. Her position of power had vanished. She forced her mouth into what she hoped passed as a controlled smile. "I'm fine." Emily held her gaze for a moment, then gave a single nod. "I'll hold you to that." With that, she turned and walked away. Patricia exhaled unsteadily, her hands clenched in her lap. It was over, or so she thought. A sharp notification tone broke the silence. She looked up to see the young woman who had been recording smirking at her phone, tapping it twice. Patricia's stomach tightened with dread. She recognized that expression all too well. It was the same one she had seen on her grandchildren's faces whenever they shared something online that was meant to spread quickly. Her grip on the armrest tightened as her pulse quickened. Slowly, she turned, stealing a glance at the young woman's screen. The video had already been posted. A wave of panic surged through her chest, stealing the breath from her lungs. The caption was direct. A white woman tries to remove a black man from first class. Turns out he's FBI. Patricia felt the blood drain from her hands. The flight hadn't even left the runway, and already the damage had been done. If the clip was online, there would be no controlling what happened next. She turned forward again, tried to regulate her breathing, whispering silent hopes that maybe it wouldn't explode. Maybe it would go unnoticed. Maybe people wouldn't care. Then her phone vibrated inside her purse. Once, twice, again. Her stomach clenched. She didn't want to look, but her hands moved instinctively, fishing out the device. The screen lit up. Dozens of messages were flooding in, from distant relatives, old friends, people she hadn't heard from in years, all asking the same thing. Is this you in a video? What happened? Please tell me this isn't real. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she unlocked her phone and opened her browser. She tapped on Twitter. It took only a moment. Her name was trending. The video, posted less than 5 minutes ago, had already reached tens of thousands of views. And the comments were relentless. Karma at its finest. She thought she'd get away with it. The FBI twist made my day. Patricia's breath grew ragged. Her world wasn't just falling apart. It was being scorched publicly. And deep down, she knew there would be no undoing this. But the fallout after landing would make everything worse. Her grip tightened around her phone, knuckles pale from the pressure. The ambient noise in the cabin blurred into the background, replaced by the sound of her own racing heartbeat. She refreshed the post. The numbers climbed higher. 30,000, 42,000, 61,000. Her mind raced for a solution, for an escape route. But there wasn't one. She scrolled down, eyes wide. The comments grew harsher. Unbelievable entitlement. This woman thought she'd just walk away from this. The badge reveal, Instant Justice. Someone identify her. We need a name. Her chest seized. She looked around the cabin, hoping for something, anything. But no one was paying her any attention anymore. They didn't need to. They had already seen everything. She shifted awkwardly in her seat, her whole body tense. Daniel remained beside her, unchanged, focused on his laptop. He hadn't acknowledged the video, hadn't glanced at her. His silence only made it worse. Her phone vibrated again. She looked down and saw her sister's name. Her thumb hovered, then she rejected the call. She couldn't face that conversation yet. She wasn't ready for any of it. And somehow, the plane still hadn't taken off. Yet everything around her was already collapsing. She inhaled sharply, trying to calm the chaos in her head. She needed to act. But how? Maybe she could apologize, try to explain herself. No, that would just feed the flames. Ignore it? Pretend she hadn't seen the video? Even worse. Her thoughts spiraled, colliding into one another, desperate for direction. Then the pilot's voice came through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Washington, D.C. local time is 5:43 p.m. Please fasten your seatbelts as we prepare to land. Patricia's heart sank. She had been so consumed by the disaster unfolding midair that she had forgotten what, and who, was waiting for her the moment she stepped off the plane. She refreshed the video once more. 97,000 views. Her name was now one of the top trending topics. With trembling hands, she shoved her phone back in her bag, trying to convince herself that she could still manage the fallout. Maybe, somehow, it wouldn't spiral completely out of control. Maybe the storm would pass. But that illusion shattered the moment she saw the news. Patricia nearly sprinted off the plane the second the doors opened. She ignored the glances, the murmurs, the silent condemnation that followed her down the jet bridge. She just needed to get out. But as she entered the terminal at Reagan National Airport, her heart dropped. Near baggage claim stood a small group of reporters. Not a massive crowd, but more than enough. A woman in a fitted navy blazer stood in front of a camera, microphone in hand, reading from her phone. The footage circulating online shows an unidentified woman attempting to remove an FBI agent from first class, citing personal discomfort. The clip has surpassed 1 million views in only a few hours. Patricia's breath caught. 1 million? That couldn't be right. She quickly turned her head, hoping to escape unnoticed, but one of the reporters spotted her. Their expression shifted instantly. "That's her," someone shouted. Panic surged through Patricia's chest. She turned sharply, heels clacking across the tile as she made for the nearest exit. Her phone buzzed wildly in her purse. Calls, messages, news alerts, none of which she could outrun. She pushed past other travelers, her breath shallow, hands damp. Just as she reached the curb, she heard her name shouted behind her. "Ms. Langford, do you have any comment about the video?" Her stomach flipped. She hadn't even realized her identity had been made public. A taxi rolled to a stop, and she practically dove into the back seat. "Drive. Please now." The driver looked at her curiously, but obeyed without a word. She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to quiet her thoughts. 1 million people had seen it. Her carefully curated life, her image, her respectability, crumbled in hours. The phone vibrated again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. Her heart pounded. Just before the call went to voicemail, she picked up. "Hello." A short pause, then a composed voice. "Ms. Langford, this is James Rollins, chair of the Marston Foundation. I'm assuming you've seen the video." Her throat tightened. She had been part of the board for years. The organization was built on values like diversity and ethical leadership. She didn't need to ask why he was calling. "James, we need you to resign," he cut in. "Effective immediately." She froze. There was no hesitation in his voice. It wasn't a suggestion. It was final. "But everything's being misunderstood." "The board doesn't see it that way," he replied. "We'll release a statement in the morning. Your resignation should be submitted by then." The call ended with a beep. Patricia lowered the phone slowly, staring at nothing. Her career was gone. Her name tainted. And the worst part was knowing no one was interested in her version of events. The video had told the story, and for most people, that was enough. She drew in a shaky breath. This wasn't a narrative she could spin. It wasn't someone else's mistake. It was hers. And now she had to live with the consequences. Somewhere, Daniel Stokes had probably already moved on. By now, he was likely in a meeting, his life uninterrupted. For him, it had just been another ordinary day.